I'm Karen Sullivan, Sullivan Solutions, and joining me today are Kathy Warnick of Warnick Consultants, Linda Sheridan of Snyder and Company CPAs, Sharon DeLay of Go HR, and Karen Poling with Karen Poling Law. Kathy, we'll start with you. What's the most important things you are currently advising your clients to prepare for the restart?
So right now, the most important thing, a lot of our clients are starting to receive the Paycheck Protection Loan money or the EIDL loan for those who have applied. In order for the loan to be 100% forgivable, you have certain criteria that you have to meet. 75% of that money has to be paid against payroll. And then 25% of that money can be used for operations such as utilities and rent. So for those who are using QuickBooks to track their accounting, I am having my clients create a class for the COVID expenses, and then we can custom make a report to track how much of that money is being used for what. I mean, if it's not forgivable, the good news is that it's only 1% interest rate. So it's not huge, but why pay interest and pay it back if it's free money? And so I'm happy to help anybody who has questions about how to set that up, but that is going to be really, really important to track that. If you don't have QuickBooks, there are ways that we can track it to you in a spreadsheet, but it's going to be something that you really, really want to do. Work with your bookkeeper, work with your CPA, figure out which of your expenses can be used, can be paid for with that money. And make sure you track it. That is the most important thing that you can do.
What are we actually doing with this stuff that we're tracking? Is that being, are we submitting that to somebody, or what's going on with that?
I don't think we have a definitive answer to that. The possibility exists that yes, you will have to defend what you spent the money on. Again, depending on what day of the week it is and who you're getting the information from, right? It's all different. So we don't really know for certain 100%. The last I heard was if your loan is under $2 million, they're not going to make you justify it. I wouldn't trust that. My thought process, track it now so that if you have to justify it, it's already there and you don't have to go back and rebuild it. So there's that. I've said this before, now is the perfect time, right? A lot of us are not working, we're working from home, business is slow. Now is the time to work on your business plan, right? Revisit your business plan. Does it still working? Are you still on track for that? Does it need to be modified in any way? Now's the time to do some cash flow projections. What happens if I lose 20% of my revenue? What happens if I lose 30% of my revenue? Where can I cut costs? Do I have to lay people off? Are there expenses that I can back out? Like, be prepared for whatever happens. If you're lucky enough to get the Paycheck Protection Loan or the EIDL loan, that's awesome. But take this time now while things are slow to actually work in your business and take care of those pesky issues that none of us have time to do on a regular basis. It's the best time to do that right now. Decide which, what expenses can you live without, right? Cut your office expense budget. Cut your meals and entertainment budget. Everybody's different, so I can't say specifically what it is that you need to look at, but just look at your accounting and see what can go and what needs to stay and have a plan. Other things, you know, like right now people are thinking, well, I can't afford to do any marketing, right? You need to do the marketing now more than ever. Marketing is not necessarily where you want to cut your budget. And maybe you can't market like you normally market, but you ought to be thinking about what you can do to, when this is all over. And it's you've heard this all over the place, the new normal, right? What's the new normal look like? And you're gonna need your marketing and your advertising to help build that new normal. So you don't wanna get rid of those partners that help every day, which is why we have these panelists right here. You don't wanna lose your CPA. They're gonna be more important than anybody else. You don't wanna lose your HR consultant. You want to make sure that if you have to have layoffs or you have to change the way you're working, that you're doing it within the bounds of the law and the new FMLA rules related to this COVID crisis. You need your attorney. Don't just make decisions out of panic, willy-nilly. Call your attorney and make sure that you're doing it right. The big thing for me was I had to have an agreement created for my employees who are now working remotely. It's a temporary work remote agreement that outlined what I expected, what was going to happen, when they're going to come back, you know, right down to the details, like just like here in the office, you can't leave employee client confidential information laying around on your kitchen table or your coffee table. You need to have a place that you're putting it. It needs to be shredded, or you need to bring it back to the office and put it in our shred bin. Don't throw it in the trash can. Don't download Fortnite on your company computer, right? It's for work. It's not for your pleasure at home. So you just have to think through things like that. And that's what all of these experts on here can help us do.
How are you handling some of the expenses that are coming through with that, Kathy? And what kinds of things are you seeing your clients' expenses that they're dealing with in relation to the work at home orders and back to work and some of the things that we're implementing?
Right. So I've heard whispers here and there. I don't know whether to take them for gospel or not, whether it's going to happen, but I've heard some talk that the possibility exists that all expenses, or maybe not all, but some of the expenses that you've incurred through this work at home process, you know, for us, I had to buy a new firewall, right? $700 right out the door. I had to buy a new firewall, wouldn't need it if we weren't all working remotely. But there has been some whispers that those expenses might be write-offs on the tax return. So whether they are or not, who knows? We'll find out eventually. But why not segment those away now so you don't have to go back and dig for them later? So I have some clients that I have created an actual line item in their Quickbooks called COVID-19 expenses. They can put all of it in there. For those clients that have received the Paycheck Protection Program, I've created a class for the COVID-19 so that any expenses that go out, we can class to that so that we actually can generate a P&L just for the COVID-19 expenses. And you can track how much by percentage, you know, how much payroll is there yet, because you have to do 75% towards payroll. So if you end up with 60% towards payroll and 35% towards operations, you're going to be in trouble. Your loan's not going to be forgivable. So it's really important to track and track well.
Linda, what are you seeing as a CPA? And Kathy alluded to, you know, keep your trusted advisors involved and ask your CPA, ask your banker. When do we need to get a CPA involved, and what are you seeing, and how can you talk to some of these issues?
Well, I have to say we definitely experienced with our client base, and there's two different kind of models of CPA. Some of them are just basic tax preparers, you know, and people don't think of them as their advisors. So it depends on which you know field you're in.
Right.
But with our clients, our phone rang off the hook. I mean, they got into unfamiliar territory. They needed help. They needed guidance. And certainly we were right there for them, figuring it out as we went. And we're still figuring this out.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing you really got to keep in mind. We have the money now. A lot of people have the money perhaps, but we still really don't have good instructions on what this next 8 weeks is going to look like and what the final report out's going to be. The only thing they've issued definitely is that anybody who got more than $2 million, they're going to audit their forgivable part. But everybody else, you're still going to have some reporting, some requirement to provide proof to the bank, because it's ultimately the bank you got the money for. It's going to be the one you're going to send the forgiveness application to. So as you're, and I think Kathy's got a great idea in terms of segregating those expenses in your QuickBooks or your accounting system, whether it's used at a class is a great way to do it. You can also do it with a job. If you want to create a COVID job, and that's where those expenses are going to get categorized. Either one, there's different strategies. Certainly talk with your bookkeeper, your CPA, how best to do that. But anticipate at the end of this 8 weeks, turning over a file to your bank that's going to have copies of your utility bills, copies of your payroll summaries, detailed calculation, just whether that's ultimately what has to happen or not, just plan on it. The other thing we're looking at too, very quickly, we pivoted from application phase to monitoring the expense phase now, because you don't want to come down to the end of the 8 weeks or week 7, run your numbers and say, oh, gee, I'm short.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be anticipating that. And what we need a lot of clarification from is, what about bonuses? What about my, payroll at the end of my 8 weeks cuts off 2 weeks out, the week after my cutoff period? What can I do there as far as this payroll expenses? Those are the kind of dialogues you need to be having with, CPA, bookkeeper, somebody who kind of can work through those calculations. We've actually got 2 Excel spreadsheets that we have, that we're working through that help build that model, and they're interactive, because it's not just a matter of how you're spending your money, it's also proving that your head count didn't go down. Right. Improving. So there's very subtle, not subtle, but not subtle. There's very distinct formulas that you have to meet, and you want to capture those. And then there's the inner overlapping part as far as the first bill that Congress passed, which had to do with Extended Family and Medical Leave Act that Karen and Sharon will talk to. There's payroll implications on there too. So if you have people that are out for sickness reasons and you have to continue their wages, that's in the same pay period, but that's not payroll protection money. That's care money. So you've got to really understand these very fuzzy rules so that you can segregate that. And that's why you need your advisors. I mean, it is something we're all figuring out as we go.
Well, before we jump forward to the EFMLA, you gave us a couple of slides on the EIDL loan and the PPP loan in terms of bookkeeping that and really keeping track. Can you talk us through those slides? Mm-hmm. The first one was the
the EIDL loan. Just a little background. These economic injury disaster loans. This isn't a new program. This has been around for a long time. This is part of the SBA's. Their job is to help people in emergencies, businesses through emergencies. This is the first time the entire country was declared a disaster area. So that's what really taxed the system. But understand that there's 2 different parts of that. One is a loan. So you go through the same process. Some of our clients did this. They went through the loan process and they were granted a loan, an EIDL loan, that is going to have to be repaid over a 30-year time period at 3.75% interest, very specific terms. That system was already in place, so that you want to account for that on your balance sheet as a loan, because that's going to be repaid. And then towards the latter part of March there, after the CARE Act was passed, they put some additional funding to that program and said businesses can qualify for up to a $10,000 grant. So a grant was part of the same program, but the grant is now it's not even really forgivable, it's just a grant. So that money, when that money comes in, that actually gets posted to your income statement. So it's not up here on your balance sheet as a loan, it's down here in your income statement. But rather than just dump that into other income, we think it's a very good idea to set up a new account for that EIDL loan and for your PPP forgivable loan. We'll talk about that in a minute. Have those as separate accounts, because when your tax preparer gets that information at the end of the year and they want to prepare your 2020 taxes, you don't want that $10,000 to get mixed in with other sources of income, say your BWC refund. Those sources are taxable. You want to segregate these so we make sure that we get the non-taxable portions separate from your other income. So don't hesitate to set up new accounts in your system to track these separately. It's kind of the point, I think, on that slide. And again, remember, there are some idle that are true loans. Those will have to be repaid.
Are you seeing much activity with this? I mean, most of what we're hearing, you know, in the news is all about the PPP stuff. How much activity are you seeing with the idle loans?
With the idle loans, we've had several clients that have applied for it. It was an interesting process too, because they filled out the application, and you couldn't request a specific loan amount. You just filled out the application, and then they were granted a certain credit limit, basically, that they were allowed to draw down. And then they worked with their local bank. So yeah, we have had some clients that have done that. And that's been great too, because it doesn't have the same amount of, you know, strings attached to it that the PPP loan does for some clients, you know, that have a much bigger need of working capital. That was a really good answer. And those are still available. That's an ongoing program. That's not something that was, you know, specifically funded and you have a short time period. Now, the problem is it has been taxed. It has been overtaxed. And so they may not have any funding for that for a while, but talk to your banker. This really worked out too. We tend to encourage our clients to have a couple of banking relationships. You know, like you diversify your portfolio, right? It's good to diversify your banking relationships because different banks have different, you know, kind of, I'm going to say sweet spots, but different benefits. And that worked out really well because some of our clients with one banking relationship, but a customer along found out that, hey, we were closed out of that PPP opportunity, but we had a relationship over here with somebody else we could toggle to.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a strategy to keep in mind going forward, that having a couple of, you know, kind of connections can really pay off. It's good to have multiple relationships.
Okay. Well, talk us through the PPP.
Yep. So the PPP loan is a little different too. So this one, you've got to record those loan proceeds when they come in. Some banks we've seen have actually encouraged clients to open a separate checking account, set that money in a separate pile, pull it over as you use it. You know, that's good advice. It's not required, but certainly it's a good way to maintain a good tracking mechanism. But remember, that one's going to go to your balance sheet. So when you get the money, it shows up as a loan. In 8 weeks, when we do the forgiveness application and the bank signs off and says, okay, not the bank, but then the SBA eventually signs off, the government will pay down part of that forgivable part of the loan. That's the point in which you reduce that loan. And now you've got, again, other income, segregate that as other income, so that you can track that at the end of the year and segregate that. What's really unclear right now, a lot of things really unclear. One thing's unclear is whether you can, because they made it quite clear that the loan proceeds, the forgivable loan is not taxable income. Yeah, keep track of that separately. What they haven't clarified is, can I still deduct the expenses? Because if I'm not able to deduct those payroll expenses, the bottom line ends up the same. The proceeds aren't taxable, but the expenses aren't deductible. So tax planning wise, I'm in the same point as I was with or without the loan. So again, that's why it's so important, Kathy's point too, to keep this stuff segregated. And just remember, you know, that you want to plan. You don't want to wait till week 7.
Right. Do it now.
Do it now. And really stay tuned. You have to stay tuned. This stuff changes daily.
Yeah.
Certainly as the media picked up this loan program and put these publicly traded companies that got all these millions of dollars, and suddenly, you know, Congress is now, you know, laser focused on the use of the money. And there was a lot of media that says, if you know, it was intended for companies that were economically disadvantaged. Well, that's easy to see when you have restaurants shut down and stores shut down, you know, but every small business is going to have economic damage from the fallout of this. Some of us today and some of us tomorrow. And that's the hard part, is if they don't, you know, that they didn't restrict it to just those businesses that are having problems today. So everybody is potentially eligible. You just have to have, just again, assume that everything's going to be looked at and you know, spend it accordingly. People have asked about, can I use bonuses to spend down the money? And the general, you know, kind of consensus is, yeah, we think you can, but make them reasonable and make them tied to, you know, something, especially if it's your normal part of your activity. You know, you just can't just throw the money out and expect it to have it go through. Be very, very careful about that.
Well, that's and start talking about bonuses and how we're treating some of that. That segues very well into now the people portion of this.
Mm-hmm. The HR portion.
So what are we talking about with the effects of the expanded FMLA and how that goes into the HR pieces on this, Sharon?
Sure. So we are still seeing a lot of clients who are confused on the paid sick leave and the expanded FMLA, and for a couple of reasons, and it's really quite understandable as to why. Most of these clients did not have a formal paid sick leave program in place. Most of them did not even have to be compliant with the traditional FMLA program, let alone suddenly having to deal with one thrown on them pretty quickly with very little guidance or understanding. So what we're trying to do is consistently and constantly remind people that these leaves, and we're just going to group them under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, so the FFCRA, because there are two significant leaves here. What we keep trying to remind people is that the guidance, the poster, the mandated notice that the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division send out really is an exceptionally good guide to help you understand if you have to pay somebody and how much you have to pay. And I will let Karen dive into that a little bit more here in a second. But what I want to emphasize that Kathy and Linda have both said all along is the documentation and the tracking are going to be absolutely critical during this time for everything. And that's even when you are talking to your employees. Say one of them calls in and says, I need to get paid sick leave because of XYZ. You need to have a dialogue with them. The immediate answer is not yes, okay, and how much. The answer is, let's talk about it. Why are you requesting it? Tell me what's going on. Go through a dialogue with these people to understand if they really are eligible for these payments. The expanded FMLA applies to one scenario only, and that is childcare. So it's really important to have those dialogues, and it's really important to track that. And most importantly, if you can get your employees to send you a request in writing asking for this information, you've got that as part of your paper trail. And I know, and I hear this daily, how people absolutely hate documenting. But if nothing gets you into the habit of documenting, this whole scenario, this whole virus situation should get you into the habit of adopting documentation as a way to do business. And even if you don't want to pull down a spreadsheet, I sent out a spreadsheet to our clients today. There's a basic documentation spreadsheet. Even if you don't want to do that, handwrite notes on scrap pieces of paper, take a picture of it, and email it to yourself. There are easy ways to do this. We all take notes when we're on calls, so that's another way to do this. But documentation is going to be absolutely critical. And like I said, as part of that documentation related to these leave requests specifically, it comes down to the who, what, where, when, why conversation. And I think the other piece that employers are afraid to engage in is asking people questions that they think might be encroaching on their personal issues. But we've pretty much been given permission to get into people's business when it comes to this COVID stuff. So have those empathetic conversations with your employees to understand what it is you should be paying for and what it is you should be documenting. So Karen, I know you have an opportunity to add on to this, particularly with the sensitivities and nuances of illness and documentation.
I want to add something there if I can before we move on to Karen polling. It's really important to keep in mind as well that there are some restrictions. For example, if you're awarded the PPP loan, I hate that term, Paycheck Protection Program loan, you are not able to also take the payroll tax credits, right? So again, this is why it's going to be important that you have your advisors like Linda and maybe Karen here, I don't know, you don't want to get yourself in trouble by applying for too many things and then having it all kicked out and you have to pay back all of it. So, you know, be careful. If you have the Paycheck Protection loan and you got the EIDL loan, you cannot use those dollars to pay for the same thing. You have to make sure that you're paying for different payroll expenses. They cannot be the same thing. You can't duplicate reimbursement for that money. So just be really careful about that.
And tying back into the two parts of the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, basically the two parts in simple language is the expanding the leave and then paying for it. So with expanding the leave, it doesn't expand FMLA itself. So if you have under 50 employees, you don't automatically have to have family medical leave for those employees. This is for people who are between 1 and 50 employees, where there is a reason that's covered by the law that mandates leave. So, and that's part of what Sharon was talking about when she said we have to have these conversations with our employees to see, is this a reason for leave that is allowed? And so what I would suggest is to go through a multi-point checklist as you do this to make sure that you're hitting those, getting why they're asking for leave. And then, as Sharon said, documenting it. Because what you want to do is be able to say, okay, well, this was my, Joe Smith applied for or requested that leave on this day. He has been an employee for over 30 days. And he requested leave because he has he's gone to the doctor because he believes he has COVID and he has these symptoms. If Joe Smith calls and says, I have an earache and I stuffy nose and there's no indication that it's COVID, or he broke his leg, I mean, that's completely unrelated to COVID. Those aren't events that trigger this type of leave. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think it's really important for those people who have to be compliant with FMLA, traditional FMLA, to explain to them how to kind of navigate those two together too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this act does not layer an additional 12 weeks of leave onto anybody who also has provided FMLA to its employees. It runs concurrently with traditional FMLA. So it's really important to make sure that there's not double entitlement here of the leave that's available.
And I think it's important, Karen, you and I talked about this. I think it's important for employers at this point to help their employees understand if they are requesting and are able or approved or whatever for the expanded FMLA, they need to understand that that does encroach on their traditional FMLA uses if they're thinking about trying to strategically use all these different leaves to get as much time off as possible during the year. Because let's be honest, there are employees out there that look at these opportunities as a way to take advantage of them to the detriment of the employer. So I think the more informed the employer is and can have conversations with the employees, they can help them make better decisions for over the course of the year. And kind of piggybacking with that, employees also need to understand once they have exhausted these two leaves, it's not like they can keep going back in and double dipping or dipping back into these leaves as the year progresses for additional issues. It is an exhaustion after 80 hours, and then it's an exhaustion after the 12 weeks. So those are kind of some of those educated discussions that you can have with employees as they are trying to decide what's the best use of their time available to them.
And can I add one thing in there too? This is most employers now use a payroll processing service. Not too many do it themselves. If you do it yourself, you still have to do this. If you're on payroll, you still need to do this. But all of the payroll companies have created line items for this kind of stuff. So you need to let your payroll company know that this is related to the coronavirus. And they have created items for the tax credits, and they need to know that that's what you're doing so that they can record the payroll correctly for you. And then they'll have the reports, which is the documentation, Sharon, that you mentioned earlier, how to track, what this is. Your payroll processing company can do this for you. They just have to know you're doing it.
I'll pick up on that too as well. If you dialogue with your payroll company now, What is the process? How do I feel? Because they're going to be different from each company, but if you understand it now before you get into that situation, because it's very easy. And this part of this challenge we haven't dealt with too much, but if we all get back into work and you start to see that return to some level of normalcy, I think we're going to have more of these cases where, there are going to be more infections, and all these rules are going to kick in. So find out now what the plan is. Don't wait until, oh, now I have somebody, what do I do?
Right, and that's a critical point, Linda, as we are opening back up, which is the whole point of this conversation that we're having, right? We're opening back up. The governor started announcing this week how we're going to start stepping into opening up different sectors. And there are a couple of things we have to realize. Just because we're opening up, this virus is not going away. It's not going to go away until we are either at herd immunity or have a vaccination, right? And then the other piece of it is all of these things stay in place at least until December 31st. Who knows if it will get expanded out beyond that. So it's not like we have to do everything by June 30th. There are different dates that apply to different things. And part of the Responsible Restart Ohio, Karen's got the address up there, is how to call employees back to work. And Karen Poling, one of the questions I continually get that I would really love for you to kind of dive into is, how do we do this so we avoid getting sued, avoid discriminating, and really avoid getting ourselves into trouble and calling people back to work?
Well, the easiest, safest advice is to rehire the employees that you let go, right? That is simple, and there's different benefits. They know the jobs that they occupied previously. They know policies and procedures. The disadvantage is that if you've laid off some people, you may have laid off your lowest performers, or there may be changing business needs and skills where you have consolidated positions where a certain degree of tech knowledge is necessary in the new position that wasn't necessary in the old position. So I'd look to that. Do you have a written policy about who you rehire? Do you have a employee manual that says if you lay off, then you rehire the people that you've laid off? And also keep in mind that the discrimination laws haven't gone away. They're still out there. So the prohibited reasons for discrimination based on race, age, sex, all those things are still out there. So where I see this really applying with respect to age is a business that lets employees go and decides not to bring back its top earners who tend to be older, they've been there a while, have more skills, but decides to bring back lower compensated employees. So one of the strategies I would use with that approach is offering the older employees the lower wage. If they have higher tenure, they don't have any performance issues, and it's really just an economic decision. I think that a valid strategy would be offer them the lower paying position, and then if they decide not to, it was their decision, not yours. And of course, this is easy, but don't base decisions on age, pregnancy. If you have a pregnant employee, don't make the decision for them that they should not be returning to work.
Do you recommend that employers kind of write down their rehire strategy as to why they made decisions in case they have to defend themselves in the future? What's your approach to that?
Well, I would use the same strategies continually. So documentation is always important. So let's say you have 4 employees that you're looking at bringing back. So let's say you only need 2 of them. So I would say, look at what the skill sets are you need, because you've now consolidated 4 positions to 2 positions. What are the position descriptions? So you have documentation of what the duties are. And then as you're trying to bring people back, do those people have those skills? And let's say an older employee does, but they make $30 an hour, and your younger employees make $15 an hour. Perhaps you offer the older employee the $15 position, offer it in writing. Email is a valid form of in writing. So again, you are tying out, you have the documentation. Or if, let's say, you decide not to hire somebody because of their poor performance reviews, make sure you have performance reviews that say they were a poor performer, and not just your vague recollection that they did something wrong once.
Which happens frequently. And Liz Rossetti, I saw you posted a question about kind of the mechanics of bringing people back. And the state of Ohio actually has a lot of information out there based on sector-specific return to work requirements. And so it covers manufacturing and construction and things like that. If you can't find it, Liz, please feel free to shoot me an email and I can send you the links or the information regarding that. But yes, staggered return to work, staggered shift, flexible work schedules are part of that strategy.
And then I saw Michelle Schaefer asked a question too about what if someone behaved poorly or unprofessionally while on the layoff. And this answer is coming straight from the payroll protection loan. Karen is going to have a different answer. I mean, they probably go together, but for the payroll protection loan to be forgivable, you don't have to have the same employees.
Correct.
You just have to have the same number of, or close to the same number of employees. So if somebody truly warrants being dismissed, you need to hire somebody in that place probably anyway, so your numbers are still the same. Or you bring that person back until it's all done, and then I'll let the attorneys and the HR people deal with it.
And before Karen hops in on that, I will just say what I say frequently is freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences.
Right.
So Karen, polling over to you.
And I understand the freedom from consequences. I would want to know more. You know, was it an improper response such that the police were called, or was it just, you know, somebody behaved unprofessionally and wasn't quite nice? So I think there's a continuum. Is that consistent with their normal behavior? Is this symptomatic of how they behaved in the workforce? And you've documented it before. I think there's so much more that goes into that question that it's really hard to give a yes or no response to it. I mean, it can be a basis for your criteria, but what are the other criteria that you're using? And you may find that those things kind of shake out anyway.
Good point.
I want to share too, real quick, a little bit of advice. You guys were talking, we started really with our clients. We're telling them if you don't already have an HR consultant or an employment attorney relationship, again, go establish that now. Because we're in the territory now that it's just, I mean, it almost feels like a landmine. It's a great time. We tell clients to look at your policies because, you know, what you have in place that works in normal circumstances may or may not work now. And it can be something as simple as, you know, Joe called off Monday, said he was sick. What's your policy for him to return to work? And he just show up for work on Tuesday? I mean, we're in a whole different time. And how much are you allowed to say, you know, again, to your point, Sharon, a lot of dialogue with the client. So with our employees, you have to have a lot of dialogue. And you almost have to get into that invasive, you know, space, but where it's too far with HIPAA. You know, at what point am I allowed to say, okay, Joe, tell me what happened. And if you just had a long Sunday and you drank too much, fess up now and don't tell me you were sick, because I don't know if you can come back without a doctor's excuse now.
Right.
In this environment.
And Michelle, to your follow-up comment, if an employee's out there talking about wages, terms, and conditions of the workplace, that's protected behavior. If they're out there talking smack about one of your clients while they're on break, that could be something a little bit different. So there is that kind of, again, everything warrants conversations. We can't just, and even before COVID, we can't just make knee-jerk reactions based on what we think is the truth or what we feel is the right response, because I promise you, when you sit down and you talk with your employees, you may learn some nuances or you may learn some additional information that will help inform a different decision than what your knee-jerk response was. Karen, polling, anything to add to that?
No, I was thinking also about, as Kathy Warnick had touched on the agreement that she had with her employees about the conditions from working from home. One of those concerns now is transitioning has an employer waived or affected their ability to say to the Americans with Disabilities Act that working from home is no longer a reasonable accommodation. So, for example, if the employee can do all duties of the position from home, that looks a bit different than if only some of their duties could be done from home. So I think that an employer has to be very cognizant of the fact that it may trigger that liability or potential issue as the employees return to the workforce.
But on a more positive note than that, it also might give an employer the eye-opening experience that you thought it was best that we're here or on client site, but it actually might work out to let people work remotely from home.
But we won't mention any names.
We won't mention any.
Not a personal experience.
I'm asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. So Linda and Kathy, you've asked Karen and I a couple questions, and I actually have a question to ask back to both of you that came up during your part of the presentation, and that is the work from home tax home office deduction was eliminated for employees a year or two ago. Do you have any indication if that's going to be reinstated for this year? And I'm asking this because I suspect employers will ultimately be asked that question at some point this year.
And that's actually a very fair question. Two totally unrelated parts of the tax code. Honestly, I wouldn't look for that to be revisited because that is part of Schedule A itemized deduction overhaul that was done. It wasn't just a one-off, it was part of a bigger scope. But something to consider is the employer still has the ability to reimburse employees for expenses.
True.
And could, within a policy framework, reimburse employees for home office expenses, short-term or on an ongoing basis. And the benefit of that reimbursement structure, as long as it's an accountable plan and it's done according to policy with calculations, then the employee gets the money tax-free. It's a tax-free reimbursement. The employer takes the deduction. It's the same thing. Same thing that mileage, you know, and actually with our clients that are small businesses that have their home office, but they have an S corp. This is the same strategy we use with them. What if you just have to reimburse yourself your mileage, you reimburse yourself for your home office expenses, and that way it's being captured in the tax deduction at the business level, but not taxable income to the personal.
Thank you.
Well, clearly we've got a lot of details going on here, and I think that underscores the concept of reach out if you've got additional questions on any of these things. We asked our registrants to put some questions in their registration forms for this seminar, and oddly enough, a lot of the questions now are starting to focus on, okay, what do we do? How do we keep doing business? Not just the details and not just the keeping the lights on. How do we make the sales, top line revenue? And it's easy for us all to get very, very caught up in a lot of these details. How to account for all the expenses and our legal liabilities for where our staff is working and not working, and who's coming back and who's not. And money is a big part of that, but I'm going to throw out the radical statement that throughout all of this, money is not your biggest problem. Money is not our biggest problem. And in fact, people aren't our biggest problem on this per se. The money is out there. An otherwise healthy business can always get money. And I would argue that right now, there has never been a more favorable time for a small business to get money. We can talk about how frustrating it has been for us to sit in line or make 20 phone calls to get the PPP, sorry, Kathy, the Paycheck Protection Plan approved, and all of the red tape that we felt like we've had to go through. But the truth is, right now for a small business, there's been far less red tape to get money. There's much lower interest rates. Even if these things are not forgiven, a 1% interest rate is a no-brainer. And there's been no better reason to go out there and get money. So money is out there. And if you've got a viable business, it's there. On top of that, thanks to In This Together, Your vendors are willing to work with you. They'll give you some time. Your existing creditors are probably pretty willing to work with you. And your loyal customers, in many cases, a lot of restaurants, we've seen the loyal customers out there driving awareness and driving business for folks who are struggling with making some changes. We can argue that yes, overall spending is down. And it's true, a large population of a large segment of our population is out of work. But even out of work, we're in one of the most robust economies in the globe, and our folks are still buying the necessities. So the money is still churning. You know, and keep in mind the largest segment with our aging baby boomers, most of them weren't working anyway. So they're sitting at home going stir crazy with no place to spend their money. You know, and they're the ones that have the discretionary income for things like travel and grandkids and eating out. So this is creating a lot of pent-up demand. So if you think your biggest problem is money, I'm going to challenge you that you are in absolutely the wrong mindset to make it through this whole pandemic crisis successfully. Because the number one reason businesses fail historically is because there's no market need. This is the key that you should be thinking about right now. What is the market need? Because the market is changing. Your market is changing. Whatever it is, it's changing fast. Your people are working differently. Your customers are working differently. They need different things. And even when things start to slow down, your market will not be the same as it was at the end of 2019. So you are going to need to be thinking really hard about what your market needs and how you're going to move forward on that. And that's where a lot of these employee issues come in. And in bringing your staff back, these are the kinds of decisions that really impact that. Because your star performer 6 months ago might have been doing something that you're not going to be able to sell 6 months from now. And you've got to really take that into consideration before you make commitments and move forward. And these are marketing concepts. This is how are you going to go to market with your business moving forward. Now is the time to be thinking about these things. There is always profit in providing for what the market needs. Always. And I'm going to challenge you that there's even bigger profit in providing for what the market wants. Yeah. We don't spend our discretionary income on the things we need. We spend it on what we want. So for businesses across the board, COVID-19 is really just amplifying any symptoms that you might have already been having with your marketability. If you're worried about staff, maintaining staff staying with you, why wouldn't they stay with a profitable company? So what can you do about that? We've heard this from the group earlier. Have the conversations. Have the conversations, talk to your customers, find out how their businesses are changing. Talk to your salespeople. This is not the time to lay off your salespeople. They need to be having the conversations with your customers. They're the boots on the ground. They're the people who are asking the questions and understanding what's out there. What do they think? They're amassing this information. Talk to your employees, talk to your vendors, get as much information as you can, because the way to survive is going to be to understand how your market is changing moving forward. And thanks to In This Together, it's pretty easy to have those conversations. There's a lot of people willing to talk right now. Do not sit back and stop being visible. Having these conversations is one way to stay very visible, stay top of mind. It's not that you're necessarily trying to sell a product right now. You're trying to stay top of mind, stay in the game, provide the needs. The number one thing you can do right now is to invest your most precious resources while the market is low. You know, you've heard buy low, sell high. Right now, cash, time, whatever, the market is low. Your best investment right now is to invest whatever resources you have in your business. And for some of us, it is time. We've got the time off. For some of us, it's the employees that we're struggling to keep employed. Most of us would, small business owners would probably say your most precious resource is your time. Now's the time to invest it. You have the time to do it yourself if you need to do that. You may be getting your SBA loans, you may be getting PPP, that may be helping you, that might help cover some of the expenses if you need to invest in getting some expertise. Because again, you can invest in the expertise right now. You can get the expertise of that CPA you might not have hired. You can get the expertise of the legal advice you might not have hired because you've got the time to focus on it. You've got the time to invest yourself in that search for knowledge and that reinvention. And more importantly, right now, you've got the opportunity. I truly believe this is the best time. You have the best opportunity right now to differentiate yourself, to stand out, to solidify your processes, establish your credibility, and move the farthest. So my advice to you, hands down, is whatever it looks like, invest now to move your business ahead.
Karen, I would just add, you said that people will pay for what they want. Nobody really wants HR, but please keep me in your minds. You can still pay for me.
What they want, Sharon, they really want some good advice so they stay out of hot water and they don't have to go over to Karen and get that defense attorney.
Right.
You know what?
I'm kind of joking. Nobody wants HR though.
Nobody wants HR. Nobody wants bookkeeping. Nobody wants a CPA. Nobody wants a lot of these things. But that's not what you're selling.
Right.
And this is one of the hardest things to get your head around it for a lot of people. Those aren't the things you're selling. When I talk to you about HR, what I'm buying is peace of mind. Because I don't have to think about it. The things that are expensive for me are decisions. It costs me a lot of time to make a decision about what to do with an employee, or how to write a policy, or how to structure an employee manual. That's a huge investment of my time and my brain power. And it's not a good use of my time. So what you're buying, what I am buying when I buy your services is more time to do what I'm good at, what I enjoy, and what I can sell to pay for those services. And God love her, Kathy Warnick knows I don't like to do bookkeeping. So,
neither do I.
You know, I will happily pay whatever she charges me to take that off of my plate. And it's so easy to forget that. But right now is when you can really get your head around that. And, you know, Kathy started this out by saying, go back and look at your business plan, look at the business model, look at some of the, your core values and your core mission statements and things. And again, some of those things might have been really nailed down 6 months ago. But look at them in relation to what's happened in the last 2 months and with the changes that you've gone through and how you're going to continue working 6 months from now. And you may need to make some tweaks on those. I'm going to put a link to some documents in the chat. We've got a basic digital marketing strategy workbook that we do. One of the key pieces of that is your mission statement, your core values, and really getting your head around who your business is and your unique selling proposition. And that's before you go out and you know, sell or try to be visible. So if you've got that investment time right now to spend on some of it, it's worth going back to some things like this and nailing that down.
Karen, I would also suggest, Karen, too, that if you have the mindset, this is a hunker down mindset, I just need to hunker down until this blows over, you're really in the wrong spot. And you're not going to come out. Your mindset has to be pivot. How do I pivot? How do I change? So honestly, the plans we had in place 60 days ago, we just updated our quarterly goals and we're like, are these even relevant? You know, for not even just for the next 30 days, but what about the next 12 to 18 months? Yeah. You know, have to be very aware and alert to the fact that this isn't just going to blow over. This is a complete market shift.
It is.
And the companies
12 to 18 month shift.
The companies that do well are the ones that get that.
Yep.
And they're ready to pivot with that. So, and that's why getting other perspectives and other mindsets around the table is invaluable too. Even if it's, you know, support groups or just roundtable groups are awesome right now, where you could, you know, not necessarily pay for professional advice, but you're just dialoguing with other business owners. What do you think? What do you think? Because we have to expand our thought process, and nobody does that. We can't do that ourselves. Very, very poorly. We do that better with other people.
Absolutely, and I think that's something we're seeing across the board. At every level of business, society, whatever, people are willing to have those conversations right now. There's a cathartic effect in talking about it and exchanging ideas. But I think what comes out of that is phenomenal in that, you know, just the potential of solving some of our problems. We've got some Q's and A's out here. We've got, can I go back and verify if I get a PP loan, I cannot use the tax credits in 911?
That is correct. You cannot use both. Okay. Right, Linda? I'm saying that correctly.
Right. You want to segregate your payroll so that if you do have somebody who's off with that COVID leave and you're paying them under the COVID family medical leave requirements and take the payroll tax credits, segregate that payroll away from your qualifying payroll for your PPP loan forgiveness. That's why talking with your payroll company is going to be vital, because you need to understand the nuances of how to report that information so it's tracked properly.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Karen.
Thanks, Daniel.